I'm going to call the meeting to order. We are late tonight because many of us have been at the public meeting in the auditorium. The first item on the agenda is for public comment on items that are not on the agenda. So if you're here to talk about a specific agenda item, I would ask you to wait and talk about that when that agenda item comes up. And probably this is a good time to talk about how that works at a school board meeting. So a school board meeting is a meeting of the board that's held in public. It's different from the kind of meeting many of you just participated in the auditorium. If you wish to make a comment, you can raise your hand. I'll acknowledge you, but the board will not be responding directly to your comment. There will be a time when I'll ask the board to reflect on what they have heard from the audience. If you still have a question, if you weren't able to go to the public meeting, or you still have a question that hasn't been answered yet, I would urge you to submit that in writing. And all questions with their answers will be posted on the website sometime tomorrow. That's obviously all in connection to transportation. So, is there anyone in the audience who wants to comment on an item that's not on the agenda? Linda.
I'm Linda Myers. I have a question, and as you said, Madam Chair, you probably won't be able to answer it, but if someone could get back to me. The state has approved $4 million for school safety issues. I saw the complete list the other day, and I didn't see a single Essex Westford school on the list. So my question is, did you not apply, or were we turned down?
Thanks, Linda. Would it be appropriate to respond?
Sure.
Yeah. Do you want me to respond, Brian? Do you want to respond?
So, Linda, when that got announced, it was right after the safety audits, and we had a chance, I personally had a chance to speak with the state held that information and shared it more than distributing that. In that conversation, I was pleased to learn that we're further ahead than many. Which gave me pause not to go hard after money, figuring that there were numbers of school districts that could use very large bumps. I think I miscalculated because 239 districts did go for the money, and hopefully it went and did get to some of the schools that really needed access control, cameras, and other things that were their priority. So we felt that we were well along and our needs weren't in the areas that they were prioritizing.
I want to thank you for that, and that's what I assume is a bad word, but that's what I thought probably because I knew about the school district, this district's safety concerns and what we've done, so I thank you very much.
Thanks, Linda. Anyone else? Okay, so we moved transportation up on the agenda to be the first item. And the way this works in a board meeting is that there'll be a presentation. The board will have the first opportunity to ask questions and make comments, and then I'll open it up to the audience to make comments. So Liz, there you are, Liz. Liz has said she would be willing to summarize for the board what happened at the public meeting.
Sure. So we had a great turnout. People who were mostly thoughtful and respectful, so I appreciate that, all of you who came out to keep the tone. This is a very hard time for all of us, and the frustration is high, so I wanted to start by saying thank you to that. We framed the presentation around three things: where we are, how we got there, and what are we going to do now that we're here, and how are we going to make it right and for all the families that it's impacted. So we gave a presentation about all of those. That presentation is right now, as we speak, being posted on the EWSD website, so you can refer to that. As is the FAQ document that we prepared with based on literally hundreds and hundreds of comments that we collected from the community, administration, teachers, parents, kids, everybody who weighed in. We collected all of those, have been theming them, and you'll find the answer to many of those questions in the FAQ that will be posted online when you leave this meeting tonight. In general, I would say it was a productive time in there because a lot of people had a lot of things that needed to be said, and this is a very, very hard time for our families in this community. So I think the meeting was mostly designed to allow people to have their say and express their concerns, ask their questions, and get answers wherever possible. And so that's what we did.
Comments, questions from members of the board?
About
Keely,
the issue or about the meeting?
either.
Okay.
Keely?
If anyone wants to talk about the meeting, you can go ahead, because I want to talk about things that weren't discussed at the meeting.
So let's start with the meeting. Anyone have any comments about the meeting?
I just appreciate Liz and whoever else is on Voices for Education, and Patrick. Kim has been
Keely.
working on, I believe.
Not on Voices.
Keely.
Keely. I appreciate everything you do as a board member. I don't have the time to put into those items that you work on communication. I think you've done a fantastic job for the board's position, and I'm very proud to work on this board with you. Thank you.
Marla.
Yeah, I know. I'll echo that because I know you put in many hours helping to put that public meeting together. So that's appreciated. Any other comments on the public meeting, Diane?
Will Jamie's tables of diagrams be put up on the web so that people can see them? Because I'm sure that they did not look at them as they were walking out the door, unless they did.
Yeah.
But I didn't see anybody doing that.
We'll improve those graphics and get them up onto the web so that they're visible and accessible as well.
And those, just for anyone who, those were the walking zones, the actual bus routes that were available for people who came tonight and will be available online.
Okay. Anything else from the public meeting? Okay. Other comments about transportation in general? Andre, Keely, and then Brendan.
I'm not sure if how to ask this question, but I had sent it to Martha, and one concern I have is that for the Essex Town high school students, my concern is that the public transportation is not going to accommodate some of the outlying areas. And a further concern of mine is that with the Westford high school buses, they have some capacity to pick up additional, because I'm sure that the routes that they travel to Essex cross over in Essex Town. So is that being explored to, in essence, accommodate the Essex Town students that are not on the bus lines where the Westford high school buses travel?
So yes, we're working with the Westford Bus Company.
Super.
There has been that contact made.
Good.
And looking at who, we would like numbers though of actual riders to know who's coming down and what routes they could pick up on the two different ways coming into Essex High School. And the other question was about what's being done for those in the town the furthest out. Is that was your other question?
I mean, Sand Hill Road is the boundary
Yeah.
of public transport. So you have Route 15, Old Stage Road,
Right.
128, Osgood Hill. The public transportation does not go there.
Right. So as a temporary solution, we have 4 vans available to us now already that the district own, and we're leasing another 6.
Okay.
And today we worked with the union on a side letter to pay employees to pick that up if they would like, paraeducators or teachers, if they would like to add that to their responsibilities. So that's another option that we just need today we were working on the details of that, and that major one was working with the union.
Great. Thank you.
Do you have anything to add, Brian?
No, that's the attempt to build sort of a high school only interim transportation system to meet the needs, and some of the surveying that we're doing right now is helping us identify, where on Osgood, where on 128, where can we take these opportunities. So, but we had Richard and Linda Matthews, who own CCR Transportation, in the audience, and we had the owner and operator for Mountain Transit, who got together right after the meeting and solved that woman's problem on 128 and feel like they can pick up that group as they come in on 128.
Good. Thank you. Yeah, we're through the survey process.
The capacity in the vans. I'm just recalling that it's a 6-passenger van, which means 5 students. So 5 times 10 would be 50.
It has to be, the capacity of the vehicle has to be under 5 passengers along with the driver to be able for us to do it without 8 light system put onto the vehicle, or for the individual to have a school bus endorsement. So we're staying underneath that threshold. Those vans that we originally purchased during the day are used for workplace assignments within the high school for the special education area. So before and after school, they're actually available. We've been utilizing them to help out with some small team transport for sports in the past. So we're trying to heavily utilize those. This will be one of the areas, and we'll need to help accommodate athletics as they go through the fall.
Oh, sorry.
I mean, I could probably go on for the next half hour, so Brendan should go first. We were here meeting on August 7th, and we received a very different picture, and you asked for our guidance about how to proceed, and we gave you guidance to continue with the plan, even though the plan hadn't achieved the equity that we were going for. But that meeting seems to have been based on information that was basically like monkeys at typewriters level of association with reality, because at that time it was like we had 17 drivers and we needed maybe 5 more in order to fully transport the district, everybody K through 12, and now we're looking at we have 25 drivers and we need 11 more. So it seems like the transportation system that we're looking at now is completely unsustainable compared to what we thought we were looking at 2 weeks ago. And it just seems like we have transportation modeling software. And I right now could ask you for information like how much churn do we usually have in the high school from year to year? And then we could produce a model of EHS transport for next year that we would know was probably like 16% off from the students who will actually attend, or 30% off. But it wouldn't be 45% off. Like, it would have some relation to reality. So I guess one thing that I'm wondering is, how do we use the transportation modeling software, and why aren't we using it to model out all the possibilities? Like, what's the possibility of half of these guys coming through the pipeline actually fail out or move to California? So what are the possible endpoints for this year? Another thing that is sort of related to this is, like, we knew that school start times were going to change some things pretty seriously when we said, okay, you can go ahead with that on May 1st, and you made that decision. And like, why didn't we examine all of the potential repercussions and aftershocks of that then, rather than on August 7th saying, you know, should we maybe also move the high school, which would, you know, obviously go nicely with moving the other schools, when clearly it was too late to really be changing a lot, and it's even more too late now. It seems that the theme of communication that came up in the community forum it's even more essential that you communicate with the board so that we know what's going on, and then we can help you communicate with the community. But if you don't tell us that, like, oh, you know, maybe the computers that run the transportation software like hate us, or like, you know, something that would make this make any sense whatsoever, because I kind of felt like at the August 7th meeting, like, oh, you know, they failed, but we're making some progress toward transporting the junction. They're showing a commitment to equity, and I'm not gonna like vote to upset that by, you know, changing everything, start times for the high school, or by saying we need to go back to the drawing board with Patrick's plan to start from kindergarten and move up, because they are making progress, so I believe that they can get there. But now it's like, you know, our plans for next year better start from kindergarten for everyone and move up from there. And if we don't have enough buses, well, now the high school has already experienced being totally like overthrown from their expectations. So we need to focus on equity. And we decided that equity didn't involve students walking 2.5 miles to Hiawatha on icy sidewalks. So we can't just keep saying, you know, oh, we'll put it off for the junction. I don't know if we're really gonna get everybody transported this year with 35 drivers or whatever. I don't know if that's gonna happen, but I know we need to change how communication happens so that we can set reasonable priorities and actually make them happen. So that's kind of what I have to say about this.
Brian, do you want to respond?
Well, I mean, I guess I'd like to think that the last few weeks of seeing so much of Patrick and Liz and seeing you in my comment screen of Google Sheets or something is an improvement towards what you're asking for and what our public deserves, right? More communication. We're stringing together at times enough time to plan A. And while we should be having plan B, plan C, and so forth done, much of a school year is about contingency planning based upon things that we don't anticipate happening. That's just, we have that element to it. So communication we should improve the sophistication of our transportation modeling, absolutely. I think we've got a great person on board that can move us much further than we've ever been as a district in that. I think that we can achieve equity. It's not at the time point that we've promised. It's not sufficient. And I hope that over time, after we achieve it and have it, that people will look back at this moment as a really dark moment and be glad that we passed through it and stayed our course. Because this is the path to providing equitable transportation, or certainly equal transportation. Because I'm not sure if equitable transportation looks like everyone gets served 100%.
That's not what I'm asking for either.
Right. But that is exactly how our system operates, our system works so that we can pick up 100% of our population, even when we go into the junction, which by its nature is not looking at seeing what each individual needs in order to have the same outcome. We would potentially drive by houses in an equitable model to make sure that we were delivering other people who had no means of getting there a chance to get to school.
If that's what you're going to deliver, that would be great.
I'm not sure if I've ever received those instructions. I believe the instructions have provide access to the degree of eligibility for every K-12 student in our district. That in its nature is not an equitable situation. I'm just saying that. It's an equal situation.
If we had a way to assess equitable, then it might be more practical.
Well, I think that's, by doing these surveys, it's certainly helping us.
Well, but it doesn't show the sacrifices that families are used to making.
Like, we're in the beginning
There's no
stages.
way that I could get a normal 9-to-5 job because I have to deliver children to and from school or put them in an after-school program that lasts until, like, you know, tomorrow. And that's because I live in the junction and they have no way to get back to their house. And I'm just used to that, so I'm not going to complain about that. But yeah, I'm very happy with the amount of energy that's gone in the last week. I just am totally confused as to why these things that we knew were options to do, like communicate with GMT, like didn't happen a year ago. So.
I mean, it did benefit from having a 10-year veteran of GMT begin employment on the 9th of July and have a chance to say, I know just the person to talk to, and put it together in the course of his first 2 weeks of employment. So, I mean, there is a good process that sometimes happens. We didn't look at it. It by general measures, the public transportation offer to our public has landed pretty flat initially because of what its shortcomings are rather than what its new options are. And it will probably take a point where we reinstate all transportation where people see this as an option that may be an improvement over school transportation. Right now, it's completely insufficient as replacing it. And I agree to that. It doesn't cover enough geography.
So I have a couple of questions for the administration, then I've got a question / challenge for the board. And I think many of us on the board have a student that is impacted by this, by the shortcoming in the development of the transportation plan. My daughter, luckily, can get a ride to school in the morning, and will hopefully take the public bus to get to her ballet practice every day after school. So that's something we're trying to figure out, as I know others in this on the board are trying to figure out as well. I am still confused as to how we are here, and so if I could just kind of recap what I think we heard and where I think we've been. On August 7th, when we got together for our first meeting of this school year, the plan was no changes to the bus system, except we might investigate some congregated stops for the town, and an expansion of the busing system to K3 in the junction. That was the plan that was presented at the August 7th meeting. 6 days later, we found out as a board via email that not only was that not the plan, but now high schoolers were not going to have transportation through a busing system. I need to understand what went wrong during those 6 days to go from such a dramatic difference to where we are today. What happened?
So, I mean, what I outlined, I think that whatever answer is going to be given, it still is going to be dwarfed by the impact and where we are. So,
yeah, but I just need to understand.
So we were working with a number that we had 20 drivers plus that I led myself. So I'm not going to throw somebody else under the bus. I mean, I was working with incorrect numbers. That's my fault. I was working with a path forward that I saw 22 to 23 drivers. That gave me, with the ability of basically getting our transportation system up and running and doing the sophisticated modeling that we expected to do, a chance to start to look at, there was a path forward where we could serve the historic and expand. And the level of sort of pressure to make sure that we expanded at least something was palpable. I mean, as is. I mean, this is where we've been. This is a demanded expectation that we do so, and I've participated in building that expectation. So that's where we were. When I got back, and there was a process in which, it became clear that this was not okay, I got clarification that 3 drivers I was counting on as being plus were infill, and they filled the vacancies that were in there. So we were all of a sudden 3 down, and then it was made clear to me that basically the next day that we had people that weren't passing tests and they weren't going to be ready on the first day of school. So it evaporated. There was a path forward until there wasn't one. Right. And I think in various communications that at least some members of the board have seen, I have been very clear that I worked on a best case scenario basis and perspective, trying to deliver transportation to our communities in a time when this feat is monumentally difficult because we don't control the input. We don't control whether someone chooses to have a certain job. So, or whether they pass, or whether they have a clean driving record. Right. So that has been the process. So I was moving in a place where, just like that woman today said, hope is not a plan. And I was working with wrong numbers, and that's my fault. When we came back and we tried to put high school, middle school, and we tried to cram these routes in, we would have filled the auditorium with another group of people.
Right.
That people would have said that we can't drop people off an hour beforehand, we can't start routes at 5:15 in the morning. And it's at what cost? I mean, why the number's so fungible is that we're constantly deciding the costs and consequences and compromises we want to make. If we want to transport, it's just math. If we work on 100%, we just divide it. If it's a high school bus, we divide a bus capacity, and it's 48 kids can fit in a bus. We divide that into the number of kids we want to transport. That's the number of buses. And then you take that number and you divide it by something. A lot of cases, people say, divide it by 2. That's the number of routes. If we take all these kids, we run 2 routes, we can get this many. Or it's 1.5, or it's 3. And so that's the compromise, because each time you stop independently serving a school and trying to serve them fully, every single student, you make a compromise of who waits, who stays longer, what duration, what's the impact. And those compromises, it's just a matter like a mobile. You pull on one, you say, we only want 50-minute drives, or we want 15 minutes after school, or 15. Each one of them determines. We run about 30, I mean, the work that the board did when right early said we have about 37 independent routes we have to run every day. Now, what's the division? How many times are we going to loop a bus?
So my second question, and I've asked you this, Brian, but I think it's important to ask it in the context of a public meeting, is given that many more drivers are anticipated than maybe initially thought in the expanded system, we've set aside money for transportation, and does the change in the system that we anticipate having to make mean that our transportation costs will grow for FY20?
I mean, I need to get through this process right now, honestly, to recalculate, right, because that's just part of where we are, right? We want a certainty.
Right.
I know that we have a budget that included bringing on the 11 drivers that are currently in the pipeline that could at least satisfy us where we are. Mm-hmm. I know that we are paying this option that's being developed as a secondary means for the high school is enormously more cost effective than what we're currently paying some independent contractors to do special ed transport. We are developing both a short-term fix and a stopgap as very well potentially a long-term solution to dramatically reduce costs. Mm-hmm. We currently, right now, pay in excess of like $40,000 to transport a single student. That cost can nearly become eliminated if we can start to utilize and create greater efficiency, or much less be less expensive. So I think there's still opportunities, and with the expertise of someone like Jamie Smith coming in and working with the community continuously, I think we can get there. I mean, I think Keely's request that we amp up the sophistication of our transportation system is absolutely. And you know, right now we're finishing year 1 of it. Essex Town has been doing it for years, but it's also been a process that it's been in addition to somebody's job. And 3 years ago, there was some, I mean, it hasn't been like this is our first time where there's been like, what's happened with transportation? The time outside our bell continues to sort of ring our bell, the transportation.
Thanks. Kim?
So I've got a couple thoughts and questions, and starting with sort of the application of our policy on transportation and the the fact that we've got rural Essex students not being transported, Westford students being transported, Island students being transported, and it seems that you can't really make those distinctions and remain sort of compliant with our policy in serving kids of similar ages with no public transportation, no sidewalks, no similar, road problems. So what do we do? I understand there are limitations to the number of bus drivers, but why, in considering changing start times or not changing start times, or how was that considered? And I think that's to you, Beth.
It is to me, but I'm a little confused because you threw, is start times your question that you want answered?
No,
or
I
your
think,
answer to,
I think
like, the
it
islands
is,
in Georgia?
well, it is, I think it's a bigger picture question. So, and I think that this is probably something that some of us have had the advantage of conversations about, but not all of us as a full board, with respect to evaluating the answer to the problem. Whether or not, reconsidering EMS start time solves the problem. And is that considered? I know individually I heard that the leadership team didn't believe that worked for a number of reasons, but I'm not sure that we've heard as a board that reasoning, because when it's put in context of not being in compliance with providing equitable transportation, for students in distances and roads and no sidewalks and at the same ages, and we're doing it for the islands and we're doing it for Westford, and those who had always paid for it as part of their K-8 budget for their 9-12 students are no longer having that access. So I think at a board level, we're responsible for policy.
Okay, so with the policy, we have a contract with Mountain Transit for the islands in Georgia. That's one contract. It's separate from the town. So we have been, I reached out to Colchester superintendent to ask if we could look at transporting together students from the islands and Georgia. Jamie's worked with the Mountain Transit to ask the same thing. The biggest question for there is the numbers. Part of our survey will help us determine that. We put a survey out to Georgia students and the islands. Ironically, there's 41 students that ride from the islands and 41 students that ride from Georgia. Depending on how many Colchester has, it's a smaller high school. I have no idea how many they have, but that's what we're working on now to see if we can combine those routes.
And
we could have a van go to Colchester, or they could drop Colchester off and then come to us. So that's something that we are working out.
And those are 41 riders, or those are 41 enrolled tuition students?
Those are 41 enrolled for both. Yes, so 82. Okay.
Enrolled though, and not, we
Correct.
don't
But
have
our
ridership
survey is
yet.
out, and I don't know what our numbers are in the survey. I was on another survey as I was watching them come in. And then for the Westford, we are working with that contractor, as Brian said, to help come down 128 and look to see who they could pick up. And that connection was made before and then in person made today. That's part of where the policy is, and it is up to the board to have a contract and to decide whether you're going to transport tuition students. So that is a board decision. Going back to the EMS start time, and if we could just move that, it's not going to help the total transportation. It won't help even if you said, oh, let's take away the island and the Georgia bus and let's move those two buses over to the town. Then the situation is, who do we choose to then transport in the town? In talking to the lawyer from the Agency of Education, she said, we're following the law because when we're not picking and choosing, we're saying this is the section, and we're also providing lots of opportunities and options. It's not like we just said, she knows what we're working on for options in transporting students. And I explained the vans and all of that we're trying to do in the city bus. We as a leadership team decided, it took 2 hours to really discuss pros and cons of going back to the original start and stop times, it is a set of other problems that comes up if we do that. And the auditorium tonight would have been a different group of people that were upset with that. I seriously run into people all the time. Thank you for the change in times. So that's what we decided as a leadership team. We stuck to it. We know that developmentally, I mean, I heard people say developmentally, yeah, but now my kid has to get up an hour earlier. The developmentally is really around academics and to take a mathematics class at 7:30 in the morning. Kids' brains aren't fired up. They suggest actually if they come in early, it should be exercise, which would be really cool if we could do that. So we talked about pros and cons with the leadership team, and we decided 100% to stick behind staying and moving forward in the direction that's, we will get a schedule and we will get there.
I guess the follow-up to that question is we've got, I think, something in the order of 570 Essex town kids and 912 that used to be transported who expected they had bus rides. I'm so happy for the ridership survey because, like, my kid doesn't need a ride, Liz's kid doesn't need a ride. Like, there are kids that we can check right off the list, don't stop. And I think that's awesome. It helps evaluate the need. I think about this, the start and stop time consideration is around brain science, and that makes sense. But I have concerns that it is not sustainable to design start and stop times that require more buses than necessary. So I presume, and I don't even recall what it will ideally be when we move the high school time, but I imagine it's somewhere aligned so that our K-5 kids are starting and stopping with some minimal differential to allow them all to get to school at a time that's on the earlier end. And our 6-12 kids are aligned around a time that is allowing for a differential for them to be using similar transportation. Is that the longer range plan? So in our interim and not being able to meet our transportation needs this year, we have a higher capacity demand and need on a system than we will next year when we are aligning the middle school with the high school. So that doesn't make sense to me because we are, by design, not making a modification for one building that could solve a problem that is part of a longer term, like we would longer term have the right number of buses and routes, right? Because if we are aligning them, even if they flip-flop who started when, we would have the same 6 through 12 around the time differential that we need to have it. So I'm trying to isolate.
So your idea is to push
Essex
Middle School way out.
I don't really know. It seems as though
it would be a start of.
Is it like? Isn't it a half-hour differential or something? Because aren't they all riding on the same bus and they just need to get from the middle school to the high school?
No, wasn't there an hour in between before?
For them to be on the same bus?
I'd have to get all our notes.
I don't know. I'm just.
A number. I think you're. I think we're at a point where it's whether the next problem and set of unintended consequences is more attractive than the problem we're experiencing and the consequences that are coming up, because there is no just. There's no just. There's no way being 6 days from school at this point in time for freshman orientation that there's a jest of like switching something back. And so I mean I just put that out there. I think that we are building a system that will be able to continue to improve, and we have to, you heard it today, people weren't satisfied with the busing in Essex town for years. Generations. We were holding kids for 50 minutes in our K2 school every day so that we optimized transportation at the middle school. We delivered kids to high school 45 minutes every single day so that we optimized transportation for our middle school. We changed the schedule to have a 65-minute difference between the schools to optimize transportation for our middle school. That's where it was optimized. It was coming up late every day for the K-5 schools, and it was arriving just on time for middle school. And the buses were waiting for middle school when the school got out, and we held our 5, 6, 7, and 8-year-olds for 50 minutes. So, like, we're already at a position of like, wow. So we want to see where we move. We're not at nirvana now, and we need a lot of moving parts. But we're trying to move a system that I told you back in February when we talked about the start and stop times. Everything in this world is going to work to keep us exactly where we are. Because changing this is impacting, it's first and foremost, it impacts people's work schedules. We don't even get to, I mean, it's barely able to talk about why we want staggered starts, how we're doing it, what it means between the bell, how we can organize a day, what we can do by creating more uniformity, more alignment with shared employees, and how we can share costs, and what interventions we can start to create and provide for students, how we can make opportunities happen between the bell. That impact that is real, and I know I leveraged my kids' public education to help my employment. We all do. But it's a part of like, to what cost? So I think that moving forward, if we're gonna have a conversation about a solution about changing time, I think that I'm not sure where you get from that, where you ultimately land if you make that decision.
And I think my point is we've created a system where we actually, I know we'll use those buses because we need to expand our busing to K through 8 in the junction. I understand that, but we're also by design not aligning. We wouldn't move the high school, couldn't move the high school because of the connection with CTE, and then created a demand for more busing than we have through a transition that is next year going to be changed as well. And I also recall there being some issue around middle school activities or something, and I don't know what that is. I know like that changed something pretty dramatically on the 10th. I don't honestly recall what that was or how that impacted, but like, can vans be used for that? I just don't know.
Yeah.
I just think if you isolate a piece of this and you think, I appreciate that the state doesn't think there's a problem, but our policy doesn't say which town you're from. It says it's based on your age, the road condition, the accessibility. Like, it doesn't say town. We're a unified district. It doesn't say that. Right. So it doesn't mean that at some point we aren't going to be in violation of something no matter what we do. But we have to acknowledge it. We have to say why the decision made to not make a change at the middle school or whatever is more important than figuring out how we do this even in a transitional way.
Okay, I've got Patrick, Martin, and then Patrick.
Like everyone, I probably have a few points to make. I certainly will probably be less vocal about it than I was last week, but I can't guarantee it. One, I think, should be a relatively easy change that I would like administration to really, really look into. I emailed about it just to get some clarification, and it has been something that has been passed along to me through emails. Some people didn't care about being identified. Other individuals, specifically did not want to be identified. But the change, at least for the junction, because, and I think that this is getting overlooked in many aspects, because Essex town residents in the high school all of a sudden lost a bunch of busing they traditionally had. But we are also in a very difficult position because we did promise busing to junction kids that are also not being taken care of. At the same time, we also reduced the amount of time that there is to drop kids off at every single Essex Junction school, and it's limited to 15 minutes now. In the previous years, at least the last two, I think it may have even been longer at Hiawatha, but that may have been a specific school policy. The school doors had been open 30 minutes beforehand. 15 minutes, even if we don't think it's going to cause a traffic issue, which I'm hesitant to say, I do know that it is the time of day puts in a very difficult position for families trying to get to work if we can't open our doors 30 minutes beforehand like we have in subsequent years. I would really encourage administration to look at that. It doesn't seem like it's a big change, but I think that it would be one that would be very gratefully received by the families in Essex Junction, because if they can get their kids to school and then make it to work, in the way that they've been, or at least gotten used to in the last 2 years, that's a change that is small, but would go a long way towards helping us. And it doesn't seem like getting someone to come in 15 minutes early to sit in the gym with kids is really something that's out of our,
I agree. I wrote that down during the meeting. I wrote it down to check on.
Okay.
The second thing is that I do think that we need to consider also as well as a board how we sort of look at ourselves and how we get presented with problems and how we tend to vote or provide recommendation. Last week I made several proposals, and I understood certainly at the time why as a board we decided to go one way, but I think that we as a board chose to make those decisions because they were easier. I think that we chose to make the decision because we didn't think that there was going to be an impact, even though I am curious whether or not we can all look around the table and say, did we make the right one? I don't know. Because I think that we knew deciding to stay the course was going to provide inequity at the start of the year for the Junction residents and for the taxpayers who are paying it. And I know that there's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And now I hear a lot about how we're making, maybe we should relook at the school or relook at changing the time of the schools. I think that if 2 weeks ago we had looked at this and said, okay, maybe pull the trigger, it's going to be hard. We move at Essex High School to 9 o'clock, which was a proposal that was on the table, then we would have buses to get these Essex Town students, because all of the runs that were earlier in the day to drop off the middle school students, those buses would then be available to go back out and pick up the high school students. And we as a board directed the administration not to pursue that route. So a lot of this is on them. I know it was not a vote, but it was seeking guidance.
Right. That wasn't a board decision.
Yes.
Right. I want to be clear that these are administrative decisions. They are not board decisions. It is our role to hold the administration accountable. It's our role to ask critical questions to make sure they're thinking about all the possibilities.
I agree, but they specifically asked for guidance. They asked us as a board how we should go.
Completely false information, unfortunately.
Right. Unfortunately. Okay. Martha.
After our last board meeting and what we've been going through, background information is when we decided to merge, we hired our new superintendent, and Beth started in July. Brian hired and started at the same time. We lost all our regular staff. When we decided to do the transportation hiring this year, Jamie, we start people in July, and it's because of budgets, but I know we always have fund balances left. I'm starting to question why, if someone isn't available, that we aren't starting them a couple months sooner. Because with the timeline that we started Jamie, we don't have the time to correct things. I'm starting to question as a board why we're choosing to do this. I think we're cutting our nose off to spite our face, and it's costing us more money. That's number one, and that's the history. Beth and Brian came in a year ago on July 1. We had 2 regular superintendents leave. We had 2 COOs in 1 year that left. So it has been hard on the board, hard on administration. So I feel like some of our agenda items that, and I'm getting this from listening to Kim, and I'm going to point you out, Kim. I heard it August 7th. I heard it again tonight. I heard the past of how Essex Town had to pay high schoolers in their K through 8 budget and bus to the high school. I think as a board, we need to know the difference of how transportation worked as a union high school district versus a merged unified district. I think there's a big difference if you start looking at it. And I don't want to start picking this district versus that district, because I can go back and say, our superintendent knew we might be doing merger, and Junction brought in about $1 million in a fund balance, and Westford and Town of Essex didn't. And now the Junction residents are not getting their transportation. So I could be as bitter as, but I can't do that because it's the kids. I did this board work in the best interests of the children. And to start nitpicking is not in their best interest. So on agenda items, I think we need to differentiate our past history and find out how we came here. Because CTE, because I was in here in the 90s and we had the high school and CTE under us, I knew how much money busing those students from the islands brought to the school, and it kept advanced class programs open that we might have had to close down. It also gave us CTE students, and we might not have been able to hold some of those programs. So I think we need to go back to the drawing board and start learning this as a board. I think we've missed some learning and education. And then I think we need to have the numbers of the income, like when we do budget this year. I think we need to look at what that income does and what it would do to classes if we lost it. Like what classes would we lose, and what would we lose with CTE if we start the high school at 9 or 9:30? I couldn't make that decision with the info we had, Patrick. I could not honestly vote your way. I agreed with you. I couldn't vote your way because I need this background information. And it's not administration's fault, it's the board's fault for this. There are 10 of us sitting at this table, and we should have been relearning this whole district. So it is, to a degree, partially our responsibility. So.
Thank you, Martha. Very interesting discussion. I started my education on this back during the Red Study, talking with the superintendent, Andrews. Talking with Superintendent Andrews. Is it off?
Yeah, no, it's on. Just pull it closer.
One thing I learned very quickly, it was the original superintendent's proposal to actually purchase buses. And we got into a discussion about that because every 3 or 4 years there's a turnover, where you have to replace a bus. And these buses cost a lot of money. The turnover on an average basis was estimated to be about $1 million per year in the budget, fairly consistent over time as replacement values occur. And I really couldn't get a handle on what the total busing needs were or how much it would cost. Each of the alternatives that I've heard have different costs and cost implications, both short and long term. And I have, as a board member, no idea what those are. I realize that we may be more efficient next year than this year, but there could be things that change, like Kim was suggesting, that might increase the pressure on transportation. things that we can't foresee right now. So one of the things, when I look at resources and equity, and I hear new proposals, I would like to have a dollar figure, both in short and long-term implications, as to what this mix or this proposal will cost, so that each of us as board members can think about that, think about the ability of our community to pay for this. I mean, I think we've committed now at least 700,000, if not more, for EJ transportation, or the total transportation. And that's
million. Right.
And it's a large number, and I think we need to keep that in mind. The other question I had was, I know in a modeling issue, as a part of my master's work, I actually did do some modeling. And I realize how complex this is when you try to do this manually. It's virtually impossible, as I found out in my own work. But it's the designing of the model and how it would work and how it can be automated. Brian, based upon your experience, if you had resources that you needed to help in this problem, how could the board help you with the number of solutions, a solution? Or I don't understand what resources you need to and I realize it's a complex issue, and you may not be able to give a complete statement tonight, but that's something that I think the board needs to have feedback on in order to, because we have budgets coming up. They're coming up sooner than we think.
Yeah, that's next.
Right.
Well, I think there's a part of it that we're going to be moving pretty fast and furious with things like trying to figure out overflow parking and whether we're going to be trying to take that project on. And some of this is rapid prototyping. We're trying to imagine it, build it, execute it within a series of hours. So there's got to be some play in which the board is aware of some things, and we may, leasing these vehicles requires action from the board potentially, and so there's going to have to be some give and take there as we try to move rapidly to put together elements. So there's that, and that's self-created. Hopefully people know that I'm taking ownership for that. Long term, I think there's some real wrestling points. I mean, I think that, these opt-out surveys are awesome. They give us data. Every opt-out survey ends with a splash screen that says, if anything changes at any time, just give us a call. So we're not working on it's informative. And we know in some cases parents are like, gonna hedge my bets, not sure if the car's always gonna work or if the commute's gonna be there. So we're not at that point. We're talking about sort of being at that point at Westford and the islands to try to gain efficiencies on buses that we perceive may not be at maximum, where we sort of say, hey, you said yes and you said no, don't show up if you said no. But we don't really have that system. So we may want to talk about what are other districts doing? What's other states doing with regards to subscription services or transportation? It is hard. I mean, transportation in the original red work that went into the original board work, it was contemplated that we needed basically 20 more routes to occur on top of the somewhere in the range of 27 or 17 routes that are occurring right now. And that there was this math that was under it, and it said, well, we're probably going to get efficiencies from here, so -1. And we'll probably be able to combine a bus here, so minus another one. And then the remaining 18 are going to do 2 runs. So we only need 9 more. So if that's the bed we want to make, then we're sitting there and saying we're going to get some kids to school an hour before other kids.
Right.
So And that means some kids are being picked up 2 hours ahead of school.
Right.
You know, it's all compromises. If we were like, that's fine, then we run it to that degree. I mean, that's the part where it, you know, we want this to be like overly sophisticated and we want to be exact numbers. And at the same time, we have conversations regularly about, oh, I'm willing to compromise in this, I'm willing to compromise over here, and we may need to have more of an understanding of the will of the board. And that was the process. I mean, we didn't just change. I spent 2.5 weeks solid responding to comments about walkout zones. So that was 2.5 weeks that wasn't on plan B or plan C. That was moving from circles to paths. And we responded to almost every email that came in. We ran different sessions. We pushed information out. And the board in that case was hopefully informed as we did that. But those were the elements. We spent 6.5 weeks working on start and stop time. And that should have, you know, I realized the mistakes of what should have been happening, but we were trying to build it in some methodical way. And it's all about the compromises as we go along.
So I think I think at some point in the future, when we're not in what I consider a crisis mode, I think we should come back to this subject and talk about what went wrong and what needs to happen differently. Right now, I think we all make mistakes. We all fail. So I think it's going to be important to do that, but I don't really think this is the time. Brenda.
So I agree with what you just said, Martha, and I want to go back to something I think Patrick started to touch on, is that we need to have a conversation about roles and responsibilities, or maybe it's just a reminder about roles and responsibilities. Members of this board are not empowered to manage the district. The only employee that we have is Beth. And our job is to hold Beth accountable for the successes or failures of the district. And obviously in this case, we did not hold her accountable, right? Because this thing went off the rails. So I think the question or the discussion we need to have is, how can we do a better job of holding Beth accountable for the things that went wrong with the transportation plan? And how can we have better oversight without getting into the management of the district and fulfill our board duty? And I think that's the question that we need to wrestle with. And those are the kinds of things we need to explore, because that's our job.
Thanks, Brendan. I think that's exactly right. We have a lot of people in the audience who came to make comments, so I'm really cognizant of that. Do you have something?
I think the path to that is by asking that these things be presented to us through the lens of policy. So in making the decision, how is that considered with respect to compliance with policy, and what things were weighed if this was not going to be able to be handled in that way, and what's the plan to get back to a place that, or is it, as superintendent, is it being interpreted differently than we might be reading it? And so I think that is something that we could ask for.
The education piece.
Just very quickly, if Beth and Brian could, because I think it's going to come up and I think that it's useful to speak publicly to it. But one of the options about changing school start and stop times back, and the disruption that would cause. What about if moving EHS forward, which is kind of where we want to be anyway? I'm just wondering this year, what would be the dramatic consequences of that? If I know you as a leadership team met, but I guess I'm trying to, like Martha suggested, think to ask a critical question. What consequences would there be of changing that forward when we know that's where we want to be next year anyway?
And you mean to change for the start of the school year?
Yeah, for the start of the school year.
So at that point, it does have to do with schedules. It does have to do with our staff and their schedules, childcare, all of that. And I know people have said to me, well, that's lesser number. True, but it's dealing with all the kids that go here too. Athletic schedules, games that have been scheduled, practices.
So those are already set based on, okay.
Play. everything, you know, it really would affect a lot. It would affect a lot of our services. We have teachers that work in multiple buildings now because we are one district.
We don't have the gap, the 65-minute gap between the K-5 and the middle school to have an isolated middle school run right now. We have isolated K-5, isolated 6-8, and then we have 5 routes that are combined K-8. So the past math with the gap, and then going off paper and sort of saying, forget about an 8 a.m. start, we're going to drop the high schoolers off at 7:15, and then we're going to come back around. So,
Right.
you know, we have some things in which the old schedule wasn't necessarily how we transport it.
Yeah.
So, but if we did look at that, we would, the gap doesn't allow us, those 5 that we're doing K-8 would need to be available for the, because we did all buses, and then we did all buses.
So even
And
doing that, the bus routes
we would have
wouldn't
to,
cover.
we'd have to go back and create, without drivers, if you're gonna have all your assets do 2 runs, you have to have approximately a 60-minute gap somewhere between that grouping. And that gap is what allows you to use that cycle over.
Okay.
So just moving one, and then you also have a problem where if you moved it, you now have a collision at the end because you have a 2:35 end, and you have now it depends what you do with the middle school, of course, but
Right.
you got a 7-hour day compared to a 6-hour and 35-minute day. So your ends have never really worked out that well either.
Okay, great.
And
Thank
I
you.
think not for now, but just for the next time we hear about this, I was looking at the start and stop times just as they are right now. I mean, there's not enough time for any of it to be staggered. So 8 and 8:15 and, 8 o'clock at Founders, we just are not optimizing. I know we aren't trying to create schedules that are about transportation, but we are seeing that we probably aren't able to be as fiscally responsible, even in trying to honor the brain science around moving older kids later, younger kids earlier. That can't be done in a vacuum without considering the fiscal considerations and the ability to optimize and get 2 runs out of these guys. So I know that this schedule doesn't do it. I don't know how it goes for next year, but I hope that that information will come before us with that information.
And one of the things, on Al's point, and when we start to look at every one of our support staff having to pull a half hour, so we would that was a regular thing. The support staff would supervise the students at Essex Elementary, and we would do similar situations, but I know at Essex Elementary it was that way. You start to think of like our support staff working a half hour extra because of transportation. It's about $300,000 a year, that half hour for our support staff. So when we talk, like, that's where I think that transportation has sometimes driven us, where we've been able to work, when we think of ourselves as working on $50,000 increments of eliminating buses in fiscal responsibility. But if that elimination creates more supervision needs, we're just paying it somewhere else. So I think we have to be intentional on trying to concentrate on between the bells, have transportation service us to the best degree possible at the total gross cost that's reasonable to our taxpayers.
And balance out.
Okay. I'm really you haven't spoken.
I haven't
So
spoken. I'm patiently waiting.
I will recognize you, but I really think we've spent a lot of time talking, and a lot of people made the effort to come here tonight. So I'm going to ask after Diane that we move to comments from the public. Diane.
Thank you. I feel validated by Marla's comment that the board needs to be educated in a variety of things. I think we need to continue that effort wholeheartedly as to finding out what our district really is all about and all the nuts and bolts and how it all works and how it relates to policy. The previous superintendents didn't value that, but it's nice to hear that at least another board member does. My question is that if we are going to push for vans for high school students from outlying areas to come in here, the same distance or equivalent for a small sport, okay, that's K3, in covering that same territory might be accomplished by some similar van opportunity. And my other question is, since we do have and are going to be using special ed vans outside of the day and picking them up, can we have other students that are nearby them or on the way, especially if they're out, let's say at the end of Cascade or, you know, Susie Wilson Road or some of the other longer points from the elementary school districts? If we've got special ed, can we actually piggyback? You know, is that within the possibilities to try to at least get some those, if there's students that need transportation to come in, if that's possible to do that? At least we would be accomplishing some of that priority of K3 that we talked about.
We can certainly.
Aaron and Dylan.
They're here, so I'm asking the question.
That. We could call a friend.
Our experts. Sure. Hi, Erin McGuire and Dylan McNamara, the Directors of Student Support Services. While we do have some buses that provide specialized transportation, they are relatively full. Could we look at a few additional students on those runs? We could. If we did, we would need to figure out how to prioritize that. And that would be sort of an additional conversation to have that we haven't entered into. If we were to add any students, it would probably be only maybe 3 or 4. So you can see the capacity is so limited that to start trying to solve such a large challenge with such a few number of options might create some challenges. But Dylan and I can certainly speak with Brian and Beth about what might be possible.
Okay.
All right.
This is super fast. I know that a lot of parents have put up front porch forum ads about taking kids to school. I know that my mom is able to bring us to school in the morning, and we have one more seat left in our car. We live in Essex town, and we're already bringing a couple of kids to school, and I would encourage parents and families to reach out around your community. Like, front porch forum is great, or just like going around, like texting your friends or something like that. That's helped a lot.
Thanks, Lori. Okay, I'm going to open it up to the audience at last. I would remind you that you're going to make comments. We're not going to get into a back and forth with you. If you have questions, we will write them down and answer them in the FAQs that we're putting online. I would ask you to try to limit your comments to 2 or 3 minutes if you can, because we have a lot more board meeting to go.
Yeah.
And many of us, if you commented in the public meeting, many of us have heard those comments. So, thank you. Who would like to speak? Okay. Would you identify yourself, please?
Sure. My name is Mike Upper. I live in Essex Town. I have 2 kids going to Essex High School. One's a sophomore, one's a senior. It doesn't impact us a whole heck of a lot, so probably in the minority there. A lot of commentary tonight. You know, a couple of things. One, you asked for input in the spring, and from what we heard tonight, you listened, you didn't hear it, you made a different decision, and we are where we are. 2, when I look at the transportation policy that's posted on the internet, if it's correct, you know, you're not going to get into trouble. You can drive the proverbial bus through any decision you make and still be in compliance with it. The one area you do have a problem, though, is extracurriculars. Extracurriculars are not included in your transportation policy. I heard again in this meeting tonight that you reached out to other companies that you have contracts with to see if you can change those contracts or amend them to transport kids to and from school. I'd ask it again, please do that with your extracurricular contract. And if there is overflow between the company and the drivers, then you're going to have a conflict with your transportation policy. Now, I'm not anti-extracurricular. What I'm really getting at is you're going to have a bunch of kids exit school, walk past a yellow bus to go to the Amtrak station. Everyone knows what that bus is for. The message you're sending to the kids is interesting. You're going to need a creative way to address that, to let them know exactly why you're doing what you're doing. Okay? And as far as Brian goes, there's been a lot of things thrown at the guy tonight. I'd ask that you kind of leave him alone until he gets this figured out with all the other stuff. Kind of let him focus on what he needs to. I wish I would have said that before the meeting, because I think we could have cleaned up a lot of this, and you all need to come back to him later. Lastly, Superintendent Kopp, you have a huge opportunity here, okay? Specifically in high school. You have extracurricular kids already signed up to do all these great things. Now you have a whole bunch of kids that may not be going home until 5 o'clock and be sitting in this room. If you put as much energy into finding educational help for these students that you do in finding coaches for extracurriculars, you will come out ahead for those students instead of behind. So I'd ask you to do that. Focus your energies there. Bring those resources to those children so that they can get the help they need. Bring Sylvan in. Bring tutors in. Instead of asking staff to drive a bus, why don't we ask staff to tutor our kids? Give them some extra help. Opportunity is there. It'll be interesting to see how you use that opportunity. Thank you.
Are there others who would like to speak? Yes.
My name is Shauna Zamanek, and I guess it piggybacks with the transportation, and I touched on it in the public meeting, but in the spring, there was concern from parents, and I know that you guys sent out surveys and you said, oh, there was an overwhelming response. Everybody wants us to do all or nothing right now. I think back to kind of how things were presented, and I feel like, personally, I think things were worded certain ways or presented certain ways, and the board must have been told by administration, like, this is great, because I remember feeling like even the school board members were really pushing this and really on board, and now I see you guys frustrated. I'm like, wait a minute, you were the ones trying to sell me on this. So that's frustrating for me to go to these meetings and to be vocal to the point that I'm pretty sure some of you really dislike me. But I questioned you, and I kept being told, we have plans, we have, you know, backup ideas, we're working through it. And one of those was with this dismissal, we're going to bring in community partners, and we're going to provide, you know, things for the families to pick up on as far as daycare or after school, whatever. And conveniently, that's kind of been swept under the rug, and that hasn't come up to bite you in the rear end yet. I'm kind of surprised, because there are people struggling to figure that out. And that was a stress point. It was a stress point all summer, because nothing came from you guys. And we were told there would be support from the board and from the administration for that time period. And there was nothing. And there's shortages of the Y program, and there's and you know, not knowing that the high school helps support the ESP programs. Like, that's a big deal. And that was really disappointing to hear that that wasn't something that was known of until tonight. So I guess I'm just laying it out there that I would challenge the board to, as some of you have said, like, really question it, really listen to it, and don't just take administration's word, because we are relying on you. You guys are the ones coming to these meetings every 2 weeks. Like, and thank you for doing that. I applaud you for that. But at the same time, I trust that you know what you're talking about. So if you stand up there and you're like, yep, 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 and I'm questioning you and you're like, yep, 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 I'm putting faith that you've done the homework for me, because I don't have time to do this every 2 weeks. So it's very disappointing. There's two things that you promised us, the after school stuff and the transportation, and you failed in both of them. And then my one other comment would be that as buses come in, I'd be interested in knowing if that would alleviate some of these 6:45 pickup times for kindergartners and K through 8, or if those will automatically go to like the high school. Just because I think that 10-hour day, especially for kindergartners, is just, I mean, you want kids to like school. And if my kindergartner has to be gone for 10 hours a day, I have twin boys, they're both, when they go to kindergarten, not gonna be wanting to go back, spending that much time out of the house. So that's my piece.
Thank you. Are there others who wish to speak?
Well, really, I got one more comment based on that. You know, as you add additional buses, it's incumbent to communicate what the plan is. What's the plan for 1? What's the plan for 2? What's the plan for 3? Is it an all or nothing? You know, people are going to want to know.
Yes, so we'll make sure that's included in the FAQs. Okay. Anything else? Thank you for your patience. Thank you for listening to our conversation and for making comments. And again, if you have comments you want to make in writing or questions to ask, we would welcome those as well. Thanks. All right, we'll move on to our consent agenda, which consists of the minutes from our August 7th meeting, our August 9th retreat, and approval of warrants. Does anyone want to pull anything from the consent agenda? Yes.
I don't have any warrants to sign tonight. Do we still want to approve them and I can go over to the office?
Yeah, that would be ideal. I mean,
Okay.
since it is a process in which the board doesn't review those warrants prior to it, and that we're able to do it, it requires your signature. I think it would be in keeping, and we can also wait. So it's the board's, how the board desires.
Why doesn't she just stop over? Anything need to be pulled? You want to make the motion, Martin?
I move that we approve the consent agenda, including school board meeting minutes, August 7th, 2018, school board retreat minutes from August 9th, 2018, and approve the warrants.
Okay. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed say nay. Okay, let's move on to school board business. Our first item is an action item. This is left over from our last meeting where we heard an appeal of the superintendent's decision regarding a request for a child to attend 1 day a week at an accredited school. Beth, is there anything you want to say?
Nope.
Okay.
Not
Do board
anything
members have any questions for Beth? Brendan?
Are we going to be asked tonight to make a decision on this appeal?
Yes.
So last time, if I recall correctly, we talked a lot about the fact that it was likely that the administration would receive more requests for this, for attendance in this program. Do you have a sense of just how many on an annual basis those requests are?
Well, being new to the district,
Yeah.
I can speak to my last supervisory union, we would have 1 or 2, and that was a size district of 1,100 students. So if you want to multiply that, I mean, that could just be an estimation, right? I do know of another one in the pipeline that's coming through to me. On our September 5th leadership team agenda, we will have this conversation. I do think it needs to be a conversation, especially with K-8 leaders, and what do we do if this is something that we're going to start to approve. Right now, we have a pretty mixed bunch.
Right.
In thinking about it.
So is the discussion going to be just about whether or not we approve it, or is it going to be about can we somehow partner with one of these programs to actually incorporate some of that into our educational day?
I don't know about partnering with one of their program, and I can certainly reach out and ask if that's even an option to do that. I do know that it needs to be a conversation about taking opportunities such as they use to be outside and do those kind of things. And that's the movement that we want to go in.
Right.
We talk more about student engagement. That's certainly one way to engage students in our curriculum in that way. That's not going to happen overnight.
Right.
So.
I'd just like to bring up that some outdoor education is going on in the district. I know Westford has great science at the middle level.
Yeah.
And my daughter, the greatest thing she did in first grade was Dave Neal taught a big unit about fish and then took them to stock a trout pond and go fishing. So there are opportunities, and you could just look on building on those in the direction that people are interested.
Correct. And thank you for bringing that up, because there are many opportunities that we do, but it's not a consistent.
And it's not
one day a
equally
week.
available. Like my
Right.
son didn't get to learn about fish, so.
Yeah, right.
Last session, we spoke about if the parents elect to have their child engage without excused attendance, then they would be running into truancy issues. But if we approve this, then in essence, we're waiving and granting excused absence.
You are. Correct.
So the other question is, Pat touched upon this as well, is since the alternate school per se is not vetted on regards to what public school vetting occurs for background checks, would we be having liability issues if, not forecasting, but the world that we're in, things happen?
Right.
So with our excused attendance, would the district become liable in some fashion or another, since we are excusing?
If we excused it. Right.
In essence, appealing your decision.
Right.
Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. I wouldn't. That's a very interesting that's interesting to find out. That one has not popped into my head in all of this. I do. If we said it was unexcused, that would be on the parents.
Right, and then the truancy issue would surface after X days. But this is more of, since we're condoning or excusing the absence, then in essence, are we assuming a liability should something occur with the institution that we say you can?
That's a really good question.
That's a tough one.
Yeah.
We excuse absence. We give excused absences for like one things that.
Sure.
Yeah, it's an interesting question.
I think I remember the question being asked whether we expected that the new secretary, Dan French, would offer a same opinion as the deputy had, and whether or not we had pursued that.
Well, that's funny that you say that. I thought about bringing up on Saturday when we were having a conversation about busing, but he did remind me it was his 4th day on the job. So I have not reached out to him. I did reach out to Heather Boucher, who is the interim, and she did not, apparently, she either didn't have an answer or didn't get back to me on that. But that was right in that transition, so I don't want to say that she didn't respond, but that's a good point too, and I will reach out to him. I thought of it, but I just thought he'd get his feet wet a little. He's here tomorrow. He's here for an hour with us. We'll put it on the list of questions.
Because I think it becomes like if we're required, I think we would want some clarity around our requirements to be reporting truancy in these situations. And it sounds like I'm hearing if we approve them attending that one day a week, we don't report the truancy. We're not bound at that point to do that.
Right. So when it really comes down to it, it's the superintendent's responsibility, or you can excuse, like sometimes we have to for a hospital visit or something like that, right? Yeah. So the law does allow for that flexibility. I've just relied on it's non-credited, and so it's our responsibility to teach our students with the standards, and we're held responsible and accountable for that. So that's where I've really fell down on that. I mean, that's where I come from in that.
So this is our second request, and I know we didn't accept an appeal on the last one, so I would feel very uncomfortable accepting an appeal towards this one because I feel it's very important that we be consistent. And I don't know if we need a policy that's instating for parents to start seeing. And I love the idea if we could start doing also in the district more consistent things where kids, I know they can go outside at gym, but I think there is such a learning of things that you can do outside that if more and more parents are asking for this, I think it's time to look at it and develop a policy.
Well, I'm not sure if we need a policy, particularly if there is direction from the state level. I do want to tell the board that in communicating with the parents who brought the appeal, I referred them to the last appeal. They read the minutes, they looked at the tape. I think you heard from them that they expect we're not going to approve this, but they felt passionate enough about the program that they wanted to come and talk to us. Kim?
And I'm not suggesting that we would approve it. I would only offer any distinction in the fact that this is a kindergarten request, and kindergarten is not required in the state of Vermont. So if there is, or is it? I don't even know.
Education before age 6.
6.
Okay.
Required.
And the student's going to turn
I knew it.
6 in
Okay, I know.
October. Right.
So they have a few free days to go.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I knew the truancy requirement was at age 6. I didn't realize the statute says school is not required before age 6.
So do you have a wording of a motion that you are?
I'll do it. So I would entertain a motion that we uphold the superintendent's decision in the matter of a request for a kindergarten student to attend a non-accredited program 1 day per week. Thanks, Al. Al makes the motion. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, say nay. Thank you. Okay, next on the agenda is to approve the school board annual goals. I sent them out. I asked for feedback. I got nothing back. So where are we at with that, Brendan?
In light of tonight's discussion and what has transpired over the past couple of weeks, I feel that it's imperative to add a goal that relates to student transportation. And if the board is willing to entertain one, I have a proposal.
Okay.
I missed your setting your annual goals, and I apologize. But as I was reading this, I think there's a few of the goals that if you had a subset regarding the merger, you could put a couple of these items under a subset because you've got things like to continue to track and report on the student opportunities and financial benefits, or to continue progress on the promise of merger. So there's some things that are all lumped to me about the same thing. I just think it would make it clearer and cleaner. And I thought transportation should be included under number 1, Brendan, to understand and monitor the impact of equity issues on the EWSD community. Not only the educational pieces, but I don't know how you'd word it, the transportation. It all affects our students.
Yeah, but I agree with you. I think, but I feel like it is a big enough deal that it deserves its own specific goal outside of sort of just being assumed that it's part of the equity conversation.
So let's stay focused on transportation,
Sure.
and that we can come back and talk about the promise of merger. I think it would be helpful if we heard what you were thinking about.
So this is first draft material. So to ensure that the administration adheres to the district transportation policy and to monitor the development of the student transportation plan.
Reaction, thoughts?
I think I need to look at the transportation policy before I could vote on that, because I'm not sure that we have a complete transportation policy.
We do.
But we have an approved transportation policy.
We do, but I'm wondering if it's well done.
The gentleman in the audience was correct, you could drive a bus through it, but. That's because we were trying to just articulate what was required.
Right, and then the procedures would be determined by the
Yes, it's big enough to drive a bus through.
Right. So I'm not sure the first part of your statement, Brendan, is all that helpful.
So our transportation policy isn't helpful.
No, I think our transportation policy is fine. I think it doesn't do what people wish it did.
Right.
So,
and I guess
I think what we're doing adheres to that policy. And I think probably many other things that we could do does. And I think we probably want that flexibility. I do think we need to, I'm not sure how to word it, but I think we need to monitor what's happening with transportation. And I think we needed to monitor the communication that is happening around transportation. Because to me, that's one of the biggest failures is communication between the administration and the board around transportation, and communication between the administration and the public around transportation. So do you want to take another crack at it?
Sure. And just to, I didn't mean to be snarky. The reason I was trying to include policy is just because I was trying to indicate like that's where we should.
That's our job.
Right.
So maybe it could be something to the effect of to monitor the development of the student transportation plan as well as communication with the community on this issue.
I would like for us to include policy, because I think that is how we need to invite all of these conversations to our board table, is we have a responsibility for overseeing policy, and we speak to transportation in our policy, and we can ask that the administration tell us, how this is aligned with that, and, what their plans are. I think otherwise we go to a very slippery slope of picking the next admin task that we're going to ask to have as our goal. And I think we should we can do all the things we just talked about with respect to monitoring, but I think it would not be ideal for us to not reference it in policy like you did in the first draft. I like the first draft. Yeah.
Kelly?
I think there's other aspects of what the board does that are totally implicated here as well, like budget, know, like, hey, we're not spending $600,000. Like, that's a way for us to be informed. And communication and informing the community is definitely something that we as a board need to be on top of. And like, they can interpret the policy however they want in central office. Like, if people knew about that on June 12th, when the original goal was for them to have some sort of a draft idea of what was going on, the ability of people to plan their lives would be so much better than it is when we're making all of these decisions in August. So being really on top of the communication, I think, is so key, regardless of how policy is being interpreted.
I think that's a good point, and I do agree that part of our job is to sort of be right in the mix with the communication piece. But it sounds like there may be, and maybe this is, we're sort of coming to this realization as a board, maybe the transportation policy that we've adopted isn't sufficient. And so maybe the goal should be for the board to revisit the transportation policy as one goal, and then this goal could be a separate goal.
Yep.
So we decide that during the course of this year, whenever we figure out the best time to do it, we as a board have a conversation about the policy, we revisit the policy, we try to improve it. At the same time, we can also be monitoring the development of the plan and working with the district to communicate. So maybe it's two distinct goals.
That makes sense to me.
I think that makes sense. I don't have the goals up in front of me. Do we have a communication goal? I don't remember.
There's one surrounding voices for education.
Yeah.
There's one surrounding bringing student voice to the board.
Yeah.
So I think it is.
Yeah.
I think, I would just want us, I'm incredibly grateful for the role that the communication task team has taken in supporting communication around this matter. I just am also pretty mindful of how deeply our board would get involved with administrative issues and communicating around them. And this obviously being, I think, so huge, and you know, having foundation and policy that we set and understanding the procedures are what defines how that comes to be. I think we want to continue to support communication around district matters, and definitely monitor administration communication with the board and the public.
Right.
That's what I think it is. So I think having a goal, this is going to make way too many goals, but
I know we were worried about that before. I know. I was like, oh my God, we got too many.
To revisit the transportation policy. And to have a second goal to monitor communication between the administration and the board and the administration and the public.
Could we put the transportation policy in the existing number 7? That currently says to determine next steps in our governance model and monitoring of our policies. If we could just add a clause including a review of the transportation policy.
Yeah.
It was 7 in the one that was on me.
It's
Whatever. No, I'm saying that in the list of board
6
goals.
in the notes.
Yes.
Right, in the
Yeah,
existing
it could
list.
be
I'm not
added.
trying to give a policy number. I'm trying.
Just
Oh,
call,
you're trying to add that.
just call it out specifically in that goal.
Specific,
Right.
yeah.
C3 is the transportation one, but I think
I don't think it needs, if we say transportation.
I don't know if this matters, but you could also hold me accountable to my goal of communication. I mean, that is one of my goals. So
That's
you
true.
want the goal 2, you could, but it would be you're monitoring my goals. And one of my goals in that communication, and I've been talking about this with Martha, is to do a monthly superintendent report, both in writing and to be able to speak to it, which for me, that improves my communication to you. I mean, that's one of my ways of doing that. So I don't know if you, I don't know.
So what do you think about having the communication piece be part of monitoring Beth's goals and just to add revisiting the transportation policy to our goals? Does that make sense?
I guess I
Would you
think
be
we
bringing
might
this
be-
back to us to reread at our next meeting and vote on?
Well, we could.
I would like to see how it
Okay.
That'd be
plays out.
helpful, probably. The only thing I would say on that is that we evaluate Beth's progress on her personal goals in our superintendent evaluation, which is separate and it's part of our required responsibilities. I think speaking to monitoring communication efforts and supporting and monitoring communication efforts through the administration to the community is different. It like in the role that our board communication team took in this one and the collaboration that happened with the administration on this, it seems different than the more specific like monthly communication that might be part of Beth's goals and that we evaluate differently. We do that with superintendent evaluation. So
it could come from building leaders or Brian and it's still part of district communication without necessarily being specific to Beth's school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Although she's responsible. Okay, right. Like okay, so right now we have 2 proposals to add to the draft goals. I think we have enough in our head that we can do that. Going back to your comment, Marla, I think the reason we left those 2 promise of merger pieces separate is that one was around budget and one was just around tracking how we were doing with the promise of merger.
See, I see that all, we get that during budget. We got both of those.
Oh, we had many more times than just budget.
But see, to continue to track and report on student opportunities
and financial
is a lot different than and financial benefits of consolidation. That really belongs with promise of merger to me.
Well, it is the promise of merger. It's the promise of merger reports that we got 4 times last year.
Could I make a suggestion, Martha?
Yes.
Since we're going to bring them back anyway, and since we were already a little anxious about the number of goals we had, and now we've added 2, I wonder if we want to take a look at them just without losing any of the intent of the goals that we've captured, and see if there's a way to sort of, to Marla's point, look to consolidate or be more clear and concise. I know we did. We were definitely getting itchy about the idea we had so many goals.
If you look at number 4, it's to monitor student growth on a regular schedule in ways that reflect progress toward our vision. I mean, there's so many things to me that are all kind of interrelated that could be. Yeah,
it should be.
And it may be that we still end up with 9 or 10, but if you guys are okay with that, and Martha and I want to spend a little time with it, we might be able to rework it a little bit.
Okay, we'll try and probably try to create a work plan around what we have. But please, I'll send it out again for comments. So if you have comments, it's helpful if we get them ahead of time. I'm sure you understand that. Pardon?
I got this after the busing info, so that's why you didn't hear anything.
Just send some of that draft language to, so you got, if you want to work with it.
Great, thank you.
Did our student reps have any more goals they needed us to add?
No, I don't think so. Okay. I've forgotten, were you there for the goals conversation? Yeah. Okay, tax rate comparison. Last time we looked at just an actual tax rate comparison, and we talked about the fact that it might be helpful to see the equalized tax rate comparison, since those are the numbers that aren't affected by common levels of appraisal. And finally, I think we asked to look at how did the tax rates end up compared to what we were projecting at the time that we were doing budget hearings. So Brian has all that information on what he sent you. It took me a little while to cipher out what was where. Maybe other people didn't have that same challenge, but
at the bottom of the page is the information that gives you, the very bottom is that projected at the time of vote. And the key element here is when we were going to vote, the announced homestead property yield was $9,800. It subsequently was set at I think on June 29th, subsequently set at 10,220. Do I have that correct?
I don't remember, but I think that sounds about right.
So that
was pretty much what it was last year.
Yeah, just a rounding off of that. So as Martha said, that the bottom part is working off of the equalized tax rate, which is the closest way of seeing what is the impact of the budget. Because after you leave the equalized tax rate to take a look at what's on the tax bill, you're impacted by the common level of appraisal in each community. So if we take a look at it, you can see in this 2019 column is the equalized number. And then what I've done is I've compared, just each year is compared to see what the dollar difference is or cent difference is and what the percent difference is from the previous year. So in 2016, our equalized rate went up 2.6% here, 2.6% here, and in Westford, 2.4%. And then conversely, the same here in 2019, we saw a decrease in 2019 in Essex Junction, a decrease of 2.25% in Essex Town, and a decrease of 2.25% in Westford. And if you look at 2 years before merger, FY 2016's tax rates to 2 years after merger, 2019, is this blurry for anyone else? Just to checking that?
It is for me, but
okay. It's just I'm barely making out the numbers here. We see that we have the tax rate has gone down 10 cents between 2016 and 2019. By about 9.4 cents and 8.3 cents. So, but again, what is published on our community's websites and what shows up on our bills is the one that is impacted by the CLA, and that's on the top of the screen. So that CLA has actually been decreasing since 2016, which is an amplifier. When your common level of appraisal is less than 100%, it amplifies the tax rate that you need. When it's over 100%, it actually decreases the tax rate. So that information's out there. It may be better to kind of capture it in a takeaway or in another place. It was also published tonight in the frequently asked questions, and that has now been emailed to all families and staff in the junction and in the town district, actually.
The link was. So I hate to be a pessimist, but if we end up being in the same place we were this year with not knowing what the rates are until end of June, I think revisiting this information at the time of budget development would be a good reminder for people. Right now, people's heads aren't really in the budget, you know, so I think that would be a good time to share kind of this info again. When we start developing the FY 20 budget.
So a way in which the timing is good is that people have gotten their tax bills. I think we did in Westford in mid-July, and I think your first taxes are due September 15th, right? Yeah. So I think twice makes a lot of sense. Keely.
Conversely, just so we don't get any unhappy surprises when we're budgeting for next year, remind me how the $1 million that was supposed to be going to the capital projects operates with this. Is it that we voted for something that it should have ended up looking 2.5 cents higher than this? And
Yes,
so
and
that might
we have that factor.
jump
We
next
have
year.
I don't know if we have the lessening of the incentive, which is gonna happen in 2 cents as well. So going into the next year, we can just anticipate sort of each year continuing to get more challenging as we go in, and possibly to get more complicated with efforts at the Montpelier level. We've now are detaching health insurance from negotiated contracts, so that will be something that comes up in our process. We have contract negotiation during this budget process. That can be complicating. So there's a whole host of issues, but we're definitely, this is, without the capital money within the tax rate, we're 2 cents down, and we can anticipate how we deal with that over the next year. But we do know that 2 cents is going to get added right away because the incentive continues to evaporate.
How much would that $1 million mistake make in a difference in the tax rate?
The $1 million not being represented in our educational spending would have been a 2.2 cents.
Okay.
So the Junction resident, what I voted to support would actually have cost me $155.8.
What you voted to support was the $1.62.
And
then with the
after
state
the
changing things, it would have come down to $1.55. So from what was proposed, you would have seen a savings of more.
But the 8-cent decrease that would then have resulted would have been right in line with the incentive. Yeah. Okay.
And I think this is a perennial problem that we have to work on the legislature with. I mean, it wasn't too long ago that there was a call in time and people stopped messing around with different variables before town meeting, so that you could inform people at town meeting what they were voting on. We've kind of blown that now out where, we vote in April, and we got surprised by this at June 29th, and I think that really caused a problem.
So I think the fact is that by town meeting, you had a bill that had passed the House. What was different was it never got changed much in the Senate.
Okay. In the past.
And this year you had a major intervention from the governor that changed the whole situation. And last year too.
Yeah,
these last 2 years.
Definitely working on 2 extraordinary years of change. Right. Nearly at the very last minute of the fiscal year. And part of that pushes it where information that's normally flowing to us for quality assurance in June is now being pushed on 4th of July, because that's when things are getting settled on the last week of June. So.
Okay. Yeah, Diane.
In doing some reading on the Essex Select Board, they have a sheet that they on Essex town tax rates for their either this last meeting or the meeting before.
The municipal rates?
The municipal rates. Well, it also includes the school rates, and I'm trying to look at what they have for the school rates versus what you have for the school rates, and they don't match up whatsoever for any of the fiscal years that they have.
I've got all of those the only ones that are going to match up are the ones that are on the tax bill, not the equalized. They don't publish the equalized. Okay. And I got all my information from the 3 websites of the municipalities.
Well, this is I know, none of them match up.
Why don't we look at it together?
So I would point out that, perhaps we should take a look at what they're disseminating versus what we're disseminating and coordinate the fact that,
And the Department of Taxes actually is the one that sets the school property rates, not locally.
Well, speaking of, I'm trying to keep communication accurate. It's the reason I'm pointing it out.
Okay. Any other questions or comments on the tax rates? Okay. Task team update. Communications.
Nothing to report.
It's
been said.
We've seen the results of your
Yes,
efforts. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Brendan.
I know that he got kudos during the public forum, but I just want to thank Patrick for taking on the awesome responsibility of communicating with people on social media. As the moderator of Essex VT, I know that that's a challenging thing to do, and you've done it pretty gracefully and transparently, and I think people have really appreciated that. So thanks for that.
That's clear. Thanks, Pat. And thanks to all three of you for the time you've put in the past few days.
We do have an article up on NBC News 5 about us. I haven't clicked the link to listen to it yet, but yeah, they were here today, so yeah, let's watch that before we give our communications to things, because they surprise us with anything. It might not be our fault.
We can go home and stay up and watch the news at 11 o'clock.
Okay, are there any statewide updates?
Just a reminder to register people and can make the regional meeting, which I believe is on the
September
5th.
Is that
The
Winooski?
5th in Winooski.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's usually
There's
dinner at
some
5:30.
chance that Dan French is going
That's
to try
right.
to be at these meetings, so
Yeah.
I think it could be very helpful. Usually starts at 5 with some kind of buffet food and
Done by 8, I think, typically.
5:30 is usually when things really start happening.
This is a VSBA question. They did send out a reminder about the annual meeting, but I clicked the link and there was nothing about registration in it. Do you know if they've just not opened it, or maybe I'm missing
Probably
something?
trying to get people to save the date.
Okay.
No, the registration's on the announcement for Dan French.
Okay, so I was maybe just not.
No, that's for the regional.
That's for the regional meeting,
He's
yes.
talking about the state conference.
Yeah,
No, I'm not.
October one,
No,
yeah. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't missing something in
No,
that
but
email.
the dates are October 18th and 19th. And I don't know whether or not that's up, but I can look. And certainly we have a little more time on that one than we do the September 5th.
Right. Yes.
Just a quick question on the regional meeting. Do people ever bring their kids for like half an hour? Because I'm having sitter issues.
I can't say that I've ever seen it.
I haven't seen it, but I don't.
So it'd be better to show up late.
can't.
It would be better to show up late than bring a baby.
You know, I think I always enjoy seeing babies, but I think it's probably what you're most comfortable with. I don't think people would bat an eyelash, and I also
It's in the
don't.
library.
It's
It's
in the library.
So it's across the street from where my husband works. So I can just-
Personally, I think it brings home a reminder of what we're doing.
The
It's
kids
for
are
the
annoying
kids.
And Laura just asked if it was to include Grace and Laura as well, and absolutely. So if you guys don't have that link, I'll make sure you have it. I'll send it to both of you.
Yeah, it's free. to
It's
board
free.
members.
It's good common learning. Catch up on what's going on.
Yeah, good question. Okay, anybody have anything specific for our board agenda on September 5th that's beyond what normally would happen?
Kim, did you just say the other was September 5th?
The regional meeting is September 5th.
I don't think our.
But you know what? I think I did that wrong. I have
the
September
4th.
5th in my head for leadership team. It's
I
It's
think
the
it's
4th.
the 4th.
Our next
I know
meeting
it's
is the
the
4th.
Is our next board meeting?
Yeah.
Tuesday the 4th.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
totally
think
my
that's
mistake.
I was,
Okay.
I had the intention
Our
of
birthday's
coming into the
September
beginning of September to do an unaudited financial review. If I could ask the board's flexibility in doing that the second week of September, the second meeting in September, it would just provide a little bit more focus and attention to get the work that needs to get done.
Yeah, that sounds good. That's one thing I was going to ask you, where we were at with the end of the year. Okay.
Auditors were in the office today, so.
Anything
Timing
else
in life is
specific? If you think of anything, you can always contact me. We meet to do the agenda the week before the week that the meeting's happening. Okay, board message to the community.
I've got transportation.
Thank you.
Nostra culpa, nostra culpa.
That's pretty much all you need.
Yeah, I think providing a link to the tax rate comparison chart and some thoughts about that could be helpful.
It is in the FAQ also.
Yeah.
Right.
Let me work with Ben to get that so that that link is set up. I'll set up a separate link for that tax rate.
Okay.
And speaking of
Clunky
that,
right now.
in the minutes that Kim is doing for us, should we have her referring to that link under the tax rate?
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking, is that I can connect with Kim and with Patrick to provide a cleaner link to that tax rate comparison.
I have this current one, that's probably not good.
Yeah, it's formatted clunky. I ended up reformatting it today and would like to use that.
Okay.
So, Kim, it occurs to me that since we warned the board goals as an action item, you should say that we tabled.
I did.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. You're way ahead of me. All right, anything else?
We adjourned early?
Okay, I just want to remind you that we have an executive session meeting next Tuesday at 6:30 here.
Here, yeah, in the library,
Okay.
conference room.
May I ask how long that's anticipated to take?
We're really gun shy about saying, but we really don't think it should take more than an hour.
And that's at
It
6:30?
should not take more than an hour.
It really should be.
Should. Should is the operative
Yes,
word.
exactly. Okay, then we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
Sorry, Tan.